you all so much for coming. It's nice to have you here. Let me make sure I got everybody who's on Zoom in my sights. Welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. Erev Tov, not quite Chodesh Tov anymore, but I haven't seen many of you since the Elul began, so Chodesh Tov. And I'm really excited, trepidatious, a lot of feelings in the lead up to our days of awe. Days of awe. Awe is a tough word, right? It can mean awesome and it can mean awful. And it can mean a lot of different emotions. Of course, those of us who grew up in the Jewish tradition have memories of being in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That can be positive, I think, except for hearing about that terrible story of Abraham and Isaac. What did God tell Abraham to do? Why do we tell that on the day when every Jew comes to shul? There's so many better stories. So some of us are scarred, physically, or in Isaac's case, emotionally. But many of us have memories of going with our parents or grandparents, of being first inspired by the beauty and the awe of our tradition. And then those of us who chose Judaism, these days of awe, as I've worked with many students who have made Judaism their own by choice, these are really powerful days because our tradition insists that through this magical, mystical process of teshuvah, we can become new people. We can return to that kernel, that essence of our soul that we maybe throughout the year or throughout our entire life drift away from. But we can come back to the goodness and the purity that exists inside of each one of us each and every year. And that's the magic of and the holiness of these high holy days. And this month of Elul, the month preceding the holidays, is a head start to get started on that work of returning to what's inside. And so today we're going to talk about one of the key tools we have in our toolbox for a spiritual cleanse and for return, and that is forgiveness. Now, forgiveness, and forgive me because I have many good qualities. One of the qualities that I wish were better was my ability to focus with distraction. And I'm gonna shut the door. Because all that noise was a little distracting. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is a hard topic for many of us. Forgiving other people, especially the worse we were wronged, the harder it can be to forgive. Forgiving ourselves is often the hardest part. And so what Rabbi Greenstein, Levy, and I are going to do over the next few weeks is talk about three topics. Forgiving others, we'll talk about tonight. Forgiving ourselves, and which Rabbi Levy will teach next week. And when it's hard to forgive, which Rabbi Greenstein will close our series with. Before we dive into that, I do want to note that it's September 11th, 23 years after that terrible day. And I just want to make space for any pain or memories that anyone is feeling. And the world that we live in is an upside down world. I don't know those of you who are on TikTok, but just a few months ago, plenty of people, too many people, were saying September 11th was a good thing, that Osama bin Laden is a hero. And I just want to bring us back for a moment to the totally unrelated to our class, but on September 11th, I have a text that's particularly close to my heart, which is a book by Jonathan Safran Foer. So many of you might have heard of it, called Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. Made into a major motion picture with that guy from The Hobbit. What's his name?
Elijah Wood.
Elijah Wood, thank you. But I want to share two quotes from the book, which is about a boy with autism whose dad died in 9/11. And this book is a incredible glimpse into the mind of how he's dealing and processing with the loss and the trauma of this day. And so I just want to share two brief quotes. These are his thoughts. Little queen of a boy, Oscar. He is reflecting on a dream. He says, in bed that night, I invented a special drain that would be underneath every pillow in New York, and it would connect to the reservoir. Whenever people cried themselves to sleep, the tears would all go to the same place. And in the morning, the weatherman could report if the water level of the reservoir of tears had gone up or down, and you could know if New York is in heavy boots. Heavy boots is what he called them. Sadness. And then one more quote, which I just really, I love. He says, we need enormous pockets big enough for our families and our friends, even the people who aren't on our lists, people we've never met but still want to protect. We need pockets for boroughs and cities, a pocket that could hold the universe. As Americans, and now, of course, as Jews, who are going through the worst year in our history in a very long time, I think each one of us is in need to be tucked in to someone's pocket. Someone who loves us, who cares for us, and makes us feel like everything is going to be okay. And I think that part of the power of the High Holy Days is that when we all come together, when we sit in the Greenstein Sanctuary and see that we are a part of this community so much bigger than ourselves, we get that feeling of being safe, of being held by this community and by the divine, by God. So with that, I'd like to begin our topic of forgiveness. And those of you who've been to my past classes or actually I should say sessions during the month of Elul, we used to call them spiritual preparation for the High Holy Days. This year, it's going to be a little bit less spiritual and a little bit more intellectual. Hope that's okay. But there's going to be hopefully a few little drops of spirituality sprinkled in. But it's going to be, I hope, stimulating, because I want to take two stories that I think most of us know with some degree of familiarity. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to all read Hebrew. With some degree of familiarity, and look at them from the perspective of forgiveness. Now, I want to begin, before we talk about these two stories, with a question that Allison posed at the very beginning, before class started, which was, doesn't forgiveness feel a little bit Christian? Is that an adequate representation of your question?
Yeah, like
statement?
I know as Jews, we do teshuvah and but I feel like that's the opposite. Like I can do teshuvah, but I can't force anyone to forgive me.
Mm.
And I feel like in American society, there's always this like, oh, I particularly was thinking of the aftermath of the Charleston church shooting, when, obviously it took place in a church, so it was a Christian setting. And I remember some of the family members saying, I forgive you to the shooter. And people saying, oh, they're such great people, they forget. And it seemed foreign to me that you could make that choice rather than it being kind of a more natural, time healing things. Not to say that that is a wound that time can heal, but anyway, that's where that came from.
I also remember very much struggling with that. Seeing this was in the days after the shooting, and family saying this guy Dylan Roof, may his name be blotted out. the days after he did this, how could you forgive? I want to talk about I don't know, I'm not a Christian theologian, so I don't want to, I'm not sure, the complexities of what Christians believe. I'm sure there's a large variance, but, I want to share the Jewish idea. Two things. First, the text that I brought, and the second, which is right before the text that I brought, we'll go back to the source. This is a pivotal text for the high holiday of Yom Kippur, the day of repentance. The Mishnah, the first rabbinic text, teaches for transgressions between a person and God, Yom Kippur atones. However, for transgressions between a person and another, between between a person and their fellow, Yom Kippur does not atone until he appeases or gets forgiveness from the other person. So in layman's terms, what are the rules between us and God? Keep Shabbat, keep kosher. You could talk about ethical commandments. Is treating my neighbor well or badly actually between me and God? Let's leave that to the side for another conversation. But no matter how many ham and cheese sandwiches I eat in the little rabbi's nook behind the ark, if I ate a ham and cheese sandwich every day, even on Yom Kippur, God will automatically forgive me every Yom Kippur. That's the power of Yom Kippur. And if I did it 6 days a week, except for Shabbat, and didn't set foot in this building on Shabbat, God would still forgive me, because that is the magic of Yom Kippur. Anything that we do to make God mad, that God, in God's infinite generosity, forgives us. But even the slightest thing, if I step on your toe and I don't get your forgiveness, that sin is still on the books. That is something only you, Allison, can forgive me for. And if I did, I'm sorry. But I want to go back actually to the source of to this Mishnah. By the way, we're on Sefaria, which is the coolest technology for Jews since the scroll became a book. This has every Jewish book ever written, essentially. And let's go back to the original text, because it's very important. I think especially with regard to Christian theology, which I shouldn't comment on because I don't know enough, but you'll see where I'm going. With regard to one who says, I will sin and then I will repent, I will sin and I will repent over and over, heaven does not provide him the opportunity to repent, and he will remain a sinner all his days. With regard to one who says, I will sin and Yom Kippur will atone for my sins, Yom Kippur does not atone for his sins. Okay, and then we get to our text. So if you say, I would have to say every time before I ate a ham and cheese sandwich, I'm never gonna do this again, right? But I just couldn't, then the next day comes, I couldn't help myself. If you say, I'm gonna sin just because I know God's gonna automatically forgive me, not forgiven. And I think that's a really important distinction, that if you sin just thinking, okay, this will be wiped away, then that's not what this holiday is all about. So with that introduction, and by the way, those of you who are here online, or those of you who are here in person, feel free to interrupt me at any time. You can call me a name and I will forgive you. Okay. Hold on, here we go.
Rabbi?
Yes, Wendy.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what you just said. And what I'm thinking is, yeah, God will forgive us for what we do, but we have to feel remorse about it. When it comes to the time where, especially at Yom Kippur, that's where we have to come face to face with what we've done and have remorse about it in order to be forgiven.
So that's a very important point. And I'm gonna ask us to put a pin in that for just a second, and we'll come back to it, because it's a key part of this holiday. But I want to begin today by telling the story of Jacob and Esau. It's hard to think of more messed up, you know what, happening in the Torah between one person and another than what Jacob does to Esau. Okay, there's other, even you could say, Rabbi, that's so wrong. There's brothers who kill themselves. There's fathers who almost kill their sons. All kind of bad stuff happens. This is bad. This is bad. So I'm not going to run through the entire story because I think you're familiar with it, but I'll give you the cliff notes. So even in the womb, we have this incredible verb. The beginning of Genesis 22. We have Vayit Rotzitzu. Vayit wrote, oh, and I have, for those of you who'd like to follow along in your Chumash, I have Torah books in front of you. So please feel free to follow along. We have this incredible verb, Vayit Rotzitzu, which is translated meaning of Hebrew uncertain. So I'm going to break it down for you very quickly. This root, la roots, we have any Hebrew speakers in here?
Learning.
You're learning. Miramana la roots is to run. So la roots is to run. This form, this Hipa'el form with the double, this is more than you didn't know, but the double tzadik, the double radical, means that this happens continuously. Whatever action it is, happens continuously nonstop, like a wind up, I don't know, whatever, what are the things you wind up and then you let go? Is like that, except for the spring will never run out in continuous motion. So Rebecca in her womb has these two twins that are running around in constant motion in her womb, chasing after each other. And Rebecca says, we have this very famous line, but the children struggled in the womb, and she said, if so, why do I exist? This Imken lama ze anochi. It's a beautiful line, which we could spend the whole time talking about just this verse. But I just want to say, even from the womb, there's something going on about these brothers. And then as soon as they come out of the womb, what happens? Does anybody know what's their first interaction with one another?
Jacob's holding on to Esau's foot.
Thank you very much. Very nice, Terry. So that
Specifically, the heel.
The heel, yes.
very good.
Trying to
So,
pull him back in.
Exactly. So maybe they're running around and around and around and around trying to get each other, and Esau comes out first, but Jacob's not doing his best not to let that happen. And that root akav, like Yaakov, is the root for heel. That's why he's thusly named. So starts very young, and then we get this. Talk about. There's no way that these boys grew up in Philadelphia because there is no love lost between these two brothers. I want to read quickly from 29. If anybody wants to read Genesis, what is this? 22, 29? I had it here, sorry. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew. Anybody want to read?
Once when Jacob was cooking a stew. Hold on now. I think it moved. Okay. Esau came in from the open famished. And Esau said to Jacob, give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I am famished, which is why he was named Edom. And
sorry, there's a bunch
little
of
parenthesis says Edom is a play on the word Edom, which is red. Jacob said, first sell me your birthright. And Esau said, I am at the point of death. So what use is my birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn the birthright.
Thank you. So first of all, we know from that last line that the writer of this text was not a big fan of Esau. That's probably also a conversation for another day. But imagine, who here has a sibling? Many of us here have siblings. If your brother or sister came in and said, I am literally starving to death, I am on the point of death, can you give me something? And you said, I'll give you something, but only if you give me your most prized possession. And then they say, fine, I'll do it. And they say, no, you gotta swear to me. Jacob's a bad dude. Jacob is not a nice brother.
That's
Now,
it's really pretty rotten.
It's pretty rotten, right? The rabbis make all kind of excuses that Esau was out in the field hunting game and he was violent and bloodthirsty. And what was Jacob doing this whole time? He was at home studying Torah with his mom, right? It's all I mean, fine. The tradition reads it like that. If that's what you want to believe, fine. But just reading the plain meaning of the text, Jacob not being a very nice brother, younger brother by a heel's length, a heel's breadth. Okay, let's move on to, are there any comments on this online?
Yeah, I'd like to defend Esau a little bit on that. These were two teenagers. He probably didn't think that Jacob was really serious.
Fair. I mean, they didn't have contracts back in the day, written contracts. Back in the time of the Torah, your word, something written was not looked at as legitimate as something spoken. And so, if Esau swore, that is binding. But, okay, they're brothers. Brothers mess around with each other. I mean, I think that's a fair point. If you look at the plain meaning of the text, these are two, we don't know exactly their age, but they're young. All brothers mess around. Okay. That's a fair reading, I think, Russell. And no matter what, Jacob doesn't look good. So if we think that was bad, let's just wait till what happens next, right? So the father, Isaac, gathers Esau and says, Esau, I'm gonna give you my innermost blessing. I'm old, I'm blind, I'm about to die, right? What happens next? Anybody want to tell the story? Anybody remember it well enough off the top of your head?
Sure.
I think a lot of us do, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Go for it. Wendy and then Terry, you fill in.
Well, basically, his mother tells him to lie to his father because his father's half blind. So she puts some skins on his arms so it'll feel hairy like his brother, and gives him a good stew to say that I cooked it even though she cooked it, and give it to him and pretend to be his brother and accept his brother's blessing. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Very
Rebecca had overheard Isaac tell Esau, I'm going to give you my blessing. Go get me apparently Esau cooked wild game very well and prepared the meal for me that I like. And Rebecca intervened and said, and while Esau was out hunting, she dressed Jacob up like Esau and fixed her husband's favorite meal, and Isaac was blind, and made him, and Jacob stole Esau's blessing. Yep.
Okay. In terms of things that Jacob's gonna need to get forgiveness for, he's racking up the tally, right? Lynn, did you want to add anything?
Oh, it was Rebecca who sort of spurred him on. What kind of a mom is she?
Very, very nice, and a very important point.
I mean, she put him up to it.
Well, and okay, I'm going to defend Rebecca for just a minute. when in that episode that you had showed earlier, Rabbi, where the twins were struggling in her womb, and she asked God, what's going on? God said, you've got twins, and the younger will will lord over the older. The older one will be they're gonna switch out the birth order. And so from that point on, we see Rebecca doing everything she can to make sure that happens, that Jacob gets everything that is due to the firstborn.
It's a very good point. We also get the line right here. Where is it? Isaac favored Esau. Where is this? Isaac favored Esau and Rebecca favored Jacob because
27. Yeah.
Because he had a taste for game and here we go. Esau was a hunter and Jacob was a mild man raising livestock, and Rebecca favored him. Right here, Rebecca favored Jacob. So you're right that it was prophesized, but also maybe there was some favoritism. But I think it's a totally fair defense of Rivka, that maybe she was doing what God wanted, and of course, looked at through the lens of the rabbinic commentaries, Rebecca and Isaac can do no wrong. Rebecca and Jacob can do no wrong, and serves that little red boy, serves him well. He deserves everything he gets. I want to fast forward.
The villainization of Esau throughout the rabbinic writings has always seemed tragic to me, because there's no indication in the text that he actually was a villain. But in order to justify Jacob, we have to make Esau look like the bad guy.
There is, and it depends on your level of criticism of the Torah. I don't mean like, 2 thumbs up or 4 thumbs up, but scholarly criticism, how comfortable you are placing certain texts that came in later. But if the Torah says that his sons, the sons of Esau, became Edom, became the Edomites, right? Because he was red, and Edom means red, and therefore the Edomites, who often were at war with Israel, but also were at times at peace with Israel, you could say that later in, this nation of Edom was linked back to this person, this fictional character Esau, because as a bad person, because Israel was at war at the time, or oftentimes with Edom. And so the Torah was written, or this part of the Torah, this line that Esau was red and hairy all over, could have been added later as a justification that the progenitor of this whole nation of Edom was a bad person, and therefore that justifies our endless warring with Edom.
And if you look at this week's upcoming Torah portion, it says, don't hate the Edomites, they are your brothers.
Very, very important point. Edom is not Amalek, right? There are nations which we will eternally be at war with, says the Torah, and Edom is not one of them. Sometimes we're friends, sometimes we're
Brothers.
and sometimes we're brothers. I want to go to Esau's response. Esau is very hurt, and one of the most painful lines in the Torah, which I don't know if I brought. Let's see if I did. No, sorry, a little farther down. Okay, here it is. So Esau comes back, and he finally finished the hunt, and he made the stew, and he's so excited. Dad, I made you this delicious dish, and here it is. I can't wait for my blessing. And this is right after Jacob left, having given the blessing, having gotten the blessing. And his father Isaac says to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm your son Esau, your firstborn." And Isaac was seized with a very violent trembling. "Who was it then that hunted the game and brought it to me? Moreover, I ate of it because you came, I blessed him, and now he must remain blessed." This is one of the hardest lines in the Torah to read. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst into wild and bitter sobbing and said to his father, "Bless me too, father." But he answered, "Your brother came with guile and took away your blessing." And then he says, "First he took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing." And Esau says, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Very sad. Very sad. I think it's translated better as "have you but one blessing, father." Very sad line. And we continue with Isaac's reaction, can't get the name straight today, with Esau's reaction. And he says, "Now Esau harbored a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing which his father had given him. And Esau said to himself, 'Let but the mourning period of my father come after the Shiva, I will kill my brother Jacob.'" Is Esau pleased with his brother? Esau is living up to his name. He is red with fury. He is very angry. And Rebecca, hearing this, or hearing of this, said, "Your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now, my son, listen to me, flee at once, get out of here, go lay low for a while," etc. Okay. Jacob leaves, he goes to Haran, we know what happens. There's all kind of trickery that Laban pulls over on Jacob. Some people might call it karma. That's a conversation for another day. I want to pause until decades later, they meet again. Jacob and Esau reunite. What do you think?
Yes, Rabbi, I was sitting here and that's what I was thinking about.
What were you thinking?
About these decades later when they meet again.
Okay, perfect. So here we are, decades later, they meet again. And what happens? Do you think that do you think that Jacob should be scared? Yes or no? Is Jacob still
Yes.
worried?
I'll tell you one thing, he was.
He was scared. His brother not only threatened to kill him after all the things he stole, but we know he's a violent guy.
And he's got an army.
And he has an army.
Hmm.
He has many people, probably much big, even though Jacob got pretty wealthy, tending the flocks of Laban, he's no match for Esau. What does Jacob do? Jacob sins, they're about to reunite. Jacob, we're in Genesis 32, if you want to follow along. Jacob sends messengers ahead to his brother Esau and instructed the messengers to say, "To my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, blah, 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 I stayed with Laban, I got rich. And I send this message to my lord in the hope of gaining your favor." So he gives him all kind of, I don't know, bribes of, what's the word you would use?
Well, I think he called them probably gifts, but buttering up.
This he says, "To my lord Esau," that's showing vassalage.
Mhm.
There,
He's giving.
Using the word Adon. Adonai.
No.
he's buttering him up. So I think it's important to say, yes, would be the term that would be used in a subservient context, that between a vassal and a king. but it could also just be a term of respect. So I'm trying to think of another example. Anybody, Terry, can you think of an example this is used off the top of your head? It's very common in relation to show respect. Also, sometimes I think it could be used when Abraham buys the cave of Machpelah, and
Mhm.
he's specious. He's showing respect. Oh, my Lord. Oh, you very important people, even though what he's really saying is you're a real piece of work.
We
But
see it in the story of well, we see it in Joseph's story, but of course, at that point, they do feel like they're vassals in Pharaoh's court. But it's a very common phrase to use just as a term of respect.
So very good, and we'll come back to Joseph in a sec. That's going to be our second story.
Spoiler alert, sorry.
Very good. I also want to say, though, I think your point, Lynn, is right on, that this is tribute, right? He's scared, and he says, take this and have mercy, right? But even after the gifts, he splits up his family into two different camps, and he says, if Esau comes for one camp and kills one half of my family and my possessions that I divide up, maybe the other half can escape. So at this point, Jacob, even though gives this gesture of goodwill, he's still very scared that he, or at least half of his family, is about to get murdered. Okay, what happens? Take this part, excuse me, let me zoom out so I can see where we are. Okay, so Genesis 33. Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming with a retinue of 400. He divides his camp into two, etc., etc. He himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept.
Hey, hugged him and kissed him.
What'd you say, Wendy?
Hugged him and kissed him.
Hugged him and kissed him. Hugged him and kissed him. Then everyone he was with went forward and bowed low, etc., etc. It said, look at this beautiful family. Wow, it's amazing what you built all these years. And where is this? Jacob says, this is an incredible line. To see your face is like seeing the face of God. Please accept my present, for God has favored me and I have plenty. And Esau says, let us start out on our journey, etc. Esau says, do you want to let me assign to you some of the people who are with me? But Esau started back that day to his home in Seir, but Jacob journeyed on to Sukkot, and he built himself a house there and settled there. So they reunite. There's no violence, but they go on their separate ways. They only unite again when they're burying their father. I want to ask, I mean, we can definitely take questions or thoughts on how the scene unfolds. They reunite and reconcile, but is this forgiveness? Why or why not? Because we might have thought Esau was gonna murder his brother.
I would
He's
say it is
made-
forgiveness. Sure.
It does feel like forgiveness as far as on Esau's part. He seems to be having forgiven.
Forgiveness, part of forgiveness is giving up the right to seek revenge, or to be, that's awkwardly stated, but and Esau obviously has no longer, he said, I'm going to kill him. And that's not even in his vocabulary now. So, and much like this next story, but he says, look, I've got everything I want. You didn't keep me from getting anything. Look at all of this. And so, and if your question is, do they have to have a relationship now in order for forgiveness to take place? I think definitely not. I mean, you can forgive and then still recognize that maybe you can't coexist. You know, you go your way and I'll go mine, but we forgive each other and we no longer hold on to that desire to seek revenge.
Esau said, as soon as I bury my father, I am going to kill my brother. And they
Right.
were going to bury their father. So Jacob remembers that and thinks, holy cow, I'm in deep here.
It looks deceiving what you do on the outside may not be what you're thinking
Oh.
on the inside. You may say, oh, I forgive you, and on the inside, I'm gonna get them later, whatever. You can look real good on the outside, what's going on inside could be completely different.
And so are you saying in this moment of reconciliation, you think even though he was very polite and he didn't murder him, on the inside, maybe he was still fired up?
Does that matter though? Like if,
Right.
does it matter if we're still mad if what we do is, well, in this case, not murder someone, but you know, is it our thoughts or our actions that matter more?
Now, that's a lot of what Judaism
Yeah.
is about.
Interesting.
I guess that's why what I was saying at the beginning about I've always known Judaism to be a religion of actions. And even Rabbi Katie once said to me before she left, Judaism isn't about the promised land, it's about the desert. It's about what we do in this life, we're not trying to earn points for the afterlife. And so I guess that's why I've always struggled with forgiveness, because I don't know if it matters what I feel internally as much as how I treat the people around me.
So, okay, that's very profound. A lot of things to talk about there. I'm gonna leave what Rabbi Katie said to the side because I need to let that marinate, but I said, oh my God, Rabbi Katie, that's the most profound thing I've ever heard. And she said, oh, I heard it from another rabbi. Don't give me credit, but I think she should take some of the credit. Yeah, let's give it credit.
So it's a question of forgiving but not forgetting. I think is that it's always going to be in the back of my mind that somebody has done X that upset me. And I will be wary of that person and their outreach and their connection to me. But I probably will never trust and accept that person the same way that I did before the incident. No, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, but are you really sorry? You're just saying it. You know, the outsides and the insides to me are a big thing, and I agree, actions, but what's going on inside, I may look real good on the outside and be full of it on the inside.
So I'll draw out a point I think we're all kind of making here, which is that it's possible that Esau forgave Jacob and then didn't want to live with him and said, I can forgive you, but I can't forget. Or it's also possible.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I forgot, I didn't realize I was not on mute. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I love that you're just arguing with us on mute.
Yes,
But perhaps he didn't forgive him, but he can still be civil, right? In public, or even just because he doesn't want to, he's not so mad he can murder him anymore. He said, I can be civil for this moment, but I'm never going to forgive you. I think both are possible. I think what you're saying, and I agree, is that both are possible outcomes in this scenario. Terry, what can you add to this?
What I was arguing with myself about was but the story here, if we just take the story is clearly Esau is the one who, he has clearly forgiven Jacob. Jacob's the one that needs the forgiveness. It's not Esau. And yet what we see here is Jacob the one deciding, and again, we go back to Jacob's deceptive nature. He deceives his brother again, and it says, you go on ahead, you go ahead of us, we move slowly, we'll come along behind you, and then we'll set up our lives together, basically. And so Esau does that, and Jacob goes in the opposite direction and sets up a house in Sukkot. So once again, so we have, at least from my perspective, we see that Esau has forgiven. And Nancy, we can't go by what we think he might feel. We can only go by the text and what we see. It's Jacob is the one that says, he keeps the relationship apart.
So I do want to move on. Russell, go ahead. But
Yeah.
then I just want to say really quickly, and before you have the last word on Jacob, that you're right, Terry, and this is to Allison's point, all we have is their actions. And in Jews, how you act in the world is much more important than what you think. And we're gonna come back, and the story of Joseph and his brothers is not what they're thinking, but what do? How do they act? Okay, Russell, go ahead.
It occurs to me that Esau has given a certain level, whatever that level is, of forgiveness, without being asked to forgive. Because Jacob has never said, I'm sorry for what I did for you, will you forgive me? He's never uttered those words.
Very good, Russell. Incredibly important point. I was going to come back to that at the end. But as usual, you're leading us to where we're going. Is an apology required for forgiveness? That's a rhetorical question. We'll come back to it. But I think it's really important. He doesn't send a message that says, I'm so sorry for the things I did. He sends him some sheep. So does Esau get any indication that Jacob's sorry? Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has a lot of thoughts on this, as you would expect. And we're not going to read them for sake of time, but if you want to know what he thinks, I'll share it with you. So let me know. And by the way, the schedule said we're ending at 8:15. If anybody in person or on Zoom thought this was over at 8, you will not offend me. I forgive you if you need to sign off in 10 minutes. Try to share this. Can you guys see? Oh, I guess you can. Can you see my screen? It says Mishnah. Yeah, I think you can see it. Okay, so we're gonna go down, skipping Rabbi Sachs, God forbid, skipping this art, skipping this. Okay, to Joseph. If you can think of a story in the Torah where brothers do something even more messed up to each other than stealing their most prized possessions, their most prized treasures, it's throwing them into a pit and selling them into slavery. And that's just what happens here. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing, but remember they were planning on killing Joseph, and then one of the brothers has an idea, why should we, and you could say actually maybe he was trying to outsmart his brothers, but he said, why should we kill him when we can profit from him while he's still alive? Let's sell him into slavery instead. And so they sell him to a band of Ishmaelites who are heading down to Egypt, and he's a slave. And they take his tunic, what's it called? Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and they dip it in some animal's blood, and they give it to their father and say, oh, our poor brother. You can tell they're big fans of Joseph. Oh, my poor brother was torn apart by animals, and of course, he was his father's favorite, Jacob's favorite son, and we all know the saga. If you don't, there's an amazing musical, I highly recommend it, or you could just read Genesis 37.
It's my favorite story in the whole Bible, and Donny Osmond was the major star of such a wonderful musical.
I totally agree. Best story in the whole Bible. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of good ones, but this is certainly a good one. So what I want to come down to is, we have this terrible scene of being sold into slavery, and then the brothers have no idea what happened. The 11 brothers have no idea what happened, and there's many years pass. There's a famine in the land of Canaan. They go down to Egypt and they beg for food. They beg for stuff because they don't have stuff in Canaan and they got to survive. Who is in charge but Joseph, the right-hand man of Pharaoh. And they don't recognize him because he's speaking through an interpreter. He's probably has his Egyptian garb on and looks nothing like that annoying brother that they sold into the slavery all those years ago. And this is what happens. Well, actually, I'm fast forwarding a little bit. Let's actually go. No, we'll stay fast forwarded for sake of time.
Rabbi, he plays around with them for a while first.
He plays around with him for a while first. Why? Well, yeah, let's talk about what does he do to play around with him?
Silver.
So he sticks a piece of royal silver in one of their bags, that he fills their bags with corn and with whatever they ate back then, chicken nuggets, I don't know exactly what they were eating, but he fills their bag with all kind of stuff and they're about to head home. But he also, because he wants to test them, puts a piece of silver in whose bag?
Benjamin's bag.
Benjamin's bag. Even before this, though, even before that, he says, go back to Canaan, but you got to leave one brother with me as collateral, right?
Yeah, he left two.
Wait a minute, didn't they not bring Benjamin at first and like he made them
They
go?
didn't bring, yeah.
He
didn't
made
bring
them go
Benjamin
get
first.
Benjamin, right? He says, you got to come and bring Benjamin.
Exactly.
But you
So-
got to leave two brothers here, and just in case.
So
Yep.
we're running a little short on time, so we'll fast forward on the story. The important part for the sake, and I highly recommend reading the story if it's been a while. It's called the novella of Joseph. It's a mini novel in the book of Genesis. And like you said, perhaps the best piece of literature in the whole Torah, maybe even the whole Hebrew Bible. But he says, go back and get Benjamin. And Joseph says, Judah says something very important. Judah says, if Benjamin doesn't make it, my father will die, right? My father will die of grief. We already lost one brother. He already lost one son. Actually, let's read what they say. Read what it says. Where it says.
Supposedly Joseph.
Rabbi, I just want to say the reason this is my favorite is it's so cathartic. It's so cathartic.
It is. Why is it cathartic, though? Why do you think it's cathartic?
Well, after everything these brothers had done to him, when he finally reveals himself, he does it in tears. He is just so overcome with love for them and tells them, you know what? It was God's plan all along. All this happened for a reason. I mean, my God, if that doesn't tug your heart, what the heck would?
This one.
Very nice. It's right here, Genesis 45. But the key part, actually, we'll come back to the key part. Let's read Genesis 45, 4-8. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come forward to me. And when they came forward, he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold to Egypt. Now don't be distressed, or who would say reproach? But whatever that even means, reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. It is now 2 years that there's been famine in the land, and there's still 5 years to come. And God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth, to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it's not you who sent me here, but God, who has made me Pharaoh's right-hand man. So why, it certainly seems like Joseph has forgiven the brothers. Would you agree? Everybody
Yeah, and
I
he
think is-
also got wisdom, you know, he was like cocky in his youth, but now he was much wiser.
He was cocky in his youth, now he's wiser. But but the brothers have also done things that have led him to be able to forgive them.
But also like his station and like, you know, if he were still like, he's in a pretty good spot in life. He's Pharaoh's right-hand man. If he weren't so successful, would he feel able to forgive them?
Since we're comparing this to Esau, right? Esau also said, I'm fine, materially I'm fine, I got plenty of great family, building a whole nation. Who cares if he stole my birthright back in the day? Who cares? You're saying also, Joseph, what does he want from these little peasants? He doesn't need their apology anymore?
Oh yeah, because he's rich now.
Because he's rich. I wanna lean on Rabbi Sachs here for a moment. And before we get into what specifically allowed I'm so sorry, at this time of night, names, any time of day I'm bad with names, this time of night, the names I can't keep straight. How does Joseph forgive? But before we get to how Joseph forgives, Rabbi Sachs has a very important piece on forgiveness itself. He says, within Judaism, a new form of morality was born. Judaism is primarily an ethic of guilt, as opposed to most other systems, which are ethics of shame. One of the fundamental differences between them is that shame attaches to the person, but guilt attaches to the act. In shame cultures, when a person does wrong, he or she, as it were, when a person does wrong, he or she is, as it were, stained, marked, or defiled. In guilt cultures like Judaism, what is wrong is not the doer, but the deed, not the sinner, but the sin. The person retains their fundamental worth, i.e., Eloheinu shamash natata bi, the soul you gave me is pure, as we say in our prayers. It is the act that somehow has to be put right. That is why in guilt cultures, there are processes of repentance, atonement, and forgiveness. So what do the brothers do that merits their forgiveness beyond what I think you make an important point is the fact that Joseph didn't need that anymore. At least maybe from the outside looking in, he might not need it. But we know Joseph is a very sensitive person. So the
I
brothers
disagree.
say, oh, please, let's get more disagreement in the house. Please, go ahead, Margie.
I disagree because this Joseph has been deprived of a family for many years. And the fact that he has found one after being deprived is what brings him to want to forgive them so that he can rejoin as a family member.
So you're saying, so one could make the argument, I'm rich, I got all the servants and all the jewelry that I could ever need, but what he didn't have was a family. And now, and he maybe always yearned for that. And now, what he finally has this opportunity to reconcile with them. And so even though he's rich, this is what he really wants.
That's
Which I think
right.
is a very good message for our day too. There are plenty of people who I'm thinking of one person in particular who always says to me, I don't have a cent to my name, but I'm the richest person in the world because I got the best family. We have this beautiful line in Pirkei Avot, Ezahu Ashir, Asameach Bechelko, who is rich? The person who's happy with what they have. And there's plenty of people who have tons of material wealth who are very unhappy. So it's not always correlated. Great point. So what, actually, let's skip this because we spent a little too much time on Jacob and Esau because that is just a spectacular story. I'll read this very quickly. This is at the end of the story. The brothers sent the message to Joseph. Before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please give the offense of the servants of the God of your father's house. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him, and said, we are prepared to be your slaves. So this is them apologizing.
And this is a long time after that first incident that you see too.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with when he was revealing himself, because this is now after the father dies.
They've been in Egypt for some time now. So they remember this sin a long time.
If we actually got back to if we go back to the moment when, right before he reveals himself, as soon as they realize they're getting into trouble, that Reuben is being taken hostage, as a Reuben or Benjamin, I forget. They say, karma's back to bite us. They say, oh God, this is because of what we did to our brother.
So he had that dream that there were 7 sheaves and they would bow before him. And they got upset about that, thinking, no way, you little twerp.
And yet,
Here they are.
here they are. But
It's exactly what happened.
you bring up a great point, Terry, that this must have been at the forefront of their mind, because the moment something bad befell them, they said, this must be because of what we did to our brother. And this is decades later. Carried that a long time. So Rabbi Sachs says what they said was a white lie because their father didn't tell them to say this, but Joseph understood why they said it. The brothers used the word forgive. This is the first time it appears explicitly in the Torah, because they were still unsure about what Joseph meant. Does someone truly forgive those who sold him into slavery? Joseph wept that his brothers had not fully understood that he had forgiven them long before. He had no anger, no lingering resentment, no desire for revenge. He had conquered his emotions and reframed his understanding of events. Now,
Rabbi, I believe he did it that very day. That day when he broke down and revealed himself, bam, that he forgave them.
I interpreted that reading as he forgave them
Before they even showed up.
like, yeah, exactly, like before they showed up at all in Egypt.
well, like you said, I think Terry said, and Wendy, that it's very confusing because the back to Canaan and back to Egypt, there's a few different interactions. This is not the one we just read is not the first interaction. The first, or the second interaction is third interaction. And the second interaction, when they come back, with Benjamin, that is when he forgives. So it's not the first time around that we're reading about.
Right, and this one that we just read, where they remind Joseph that Dad said to forgive him, Jacob has been brought back to Egypt. They have lived in Egypt for some time now, with Joseph, and then Jacob dies in Egypt. Remember, we went the whole thing about taking his bones out of Egypt, and it's after that, even after all of these years, that the brothers say, now remember, Dad said you had to forgive us. So that was still, after all those years of living in Egypt with Joseph, still in the forefront of their mind. And obviously from the text, Joseph hadn't even given it another thought.
Yeah, so they were worried about it all this time, right? They were worrying about it. And the truth is, he wasn't even thinking about it.
So this would go into the forgiving yourself lesson that we're going to have soon, right?
That's a great point. The thing that you pointed out, which is very important, is that for all these years, they've been living together in Goshen. It's the Cordova, Germantown, Carterville, whatever you want to call it, of Egypt, right? It's the very nice suburb where they're all Pharaoh gives them the nicest land, and they're all living together. They're not like Esau and Jacob going their separate ways. The brothers have been living together for many years. How, after having been sold into slavery and all the terrible things the brothers did to him, how did he forgive them? 3 steps. Okay, good. This text, which I just mentioned, this is when they first encounter something bad happens, they're being punished. And they said to one another, alas, we're being punished on account of our brother, because we looked on at his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. They've obviously been carrying this guilt for a long time. Then Reuben spoke up and said, didn't I tell you, do not do no wrong to the boy, but you paid no heed. Now comes the reckoning for his blood. And they didn't know that Joseph understood this because there was an interpreter between him and them. They were speaking, probably not Hebrew at the time, but some kind of Proto, I don't know.
Aramaic?
Proto-Aramaic too. We don't really know what they would have been speaking. Maybe Hebrew, I mean, but that's a conversation for another day. But they were, Joseph hears that they knew they had done something wrong. The first time Joseph hears that his brothers regretted what they had done. Step number 1. Step number 2. This is a little bit later. This was Genesis 42. This is Genesis 44. Judah replied, what can we say to my Lord? How can we plead? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered the crime of your servants. Here we are then, slaves of my Lord, the rest of us, as much as he in whose possession the goblet was found. So, saying, not only realizing that they made a mistake, but being willing to admit, to confess to what they had done wrong. Finally, a few 20 verses later, Judah. Remember Judah, all the bad things he did with Tamar? Also, one thing, difference between Judaism and Christianity, our heroes, not always good people. What does Judah say? Please let your servant remain as a slave to my Lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. Judah saying, let the bad thing happen to me instead of the bad thing happen to my brother. Who back in the day said he should be sold into slavery instead of be murdered? Judah. Put back in the exact same situation, makes a different choice. That, according to the rabbis, according to Maimonides, talks about this explicitly. Also, it's talked about in the Talmud. That is complete teshuvah, being put back in the exact same situation or a very similar situation and not making the same mistake. So I want to close before we comment with Rabbi Sachs. He says on forgiveness itself, forgiveness only exists in a culture in which repentance exists. Repentance presupposes that we are free and morally responsible agents who are capable of change. That is the most important message of the High Holy Days. We are capable of change. Specifically, the change that comes about when we recognize that something we have done is wrong and we are responsible for it and we must never do it again. The possibility of that kind of moral transformation simply did not exist in ancient Greece or any other pagan culture. Greece was a shame and honor culture that turned on the twin concepts of character and faith. Judaism, on the other hand, was a repentance and forgiveness culture whose central concepts are will and choice. The idea of forgiveness was then adopted by Christianity, making the Judeo-Christian ethic the primary vehicle of forgiveness in history. Last paragraph. Repentance and forgiveness are not just two ideas among many. They transformed the human situation. For the first time, repentance established the possibility that we are not condemned endlessly to repeat the past. When I repent, I show I can change. The future is not predestined. I can make it different from what it might have been. Forgiveness liberates us from the past. Forgiveness breaks the irreversibility of reaction and revenge. It is the undoing of what has been done. Okay. So please forgive me for not leaving enough time for discussion on the end. But what do you think, first of all, about this story as a paradigm of teshuvah? And secondly, would you be able to forgive either Jacob or, if you were Joseph, the brothers?
Not if my life had not turned out well. If I had continued to suffer and be a slave and not receive any different stature in life, I don't think I could turn the other cheek. They would be responsible for my condition. And these guys were elevated above that. They came out smelling pretty good. So I don't know if it's, I don't know if he had gotten stuck in the same role as a slave. He might have been a little bit more resentful and held a grudge.
So even though, I think it's a really good point, even though as Margie said a few minutes ago, perhaps the thing he wanted most was beyond wealth, beyond stature. If his story had ended in the prison with the cupbearer and the baker, then maybe he never would have gotten to the point where he could forgive. Because even if family is important to you, you need some level of comfort, might not be the word, but some level of compensation in some area of your life to be able to lean on in order to forgive. If you are still, as you said, mired in the after effects of how they wronged you every single day, maybe you can't look beyond, maybe you can't look past what they did.
Rabbi, may I say something?
Please.
I think that since Joseph really believed in God, because God put these dreams in his head and the ability to interpret them, and also dreams in other people's heads that he was actually successfully able to interpret, and he knew it was something with God, that it was God given that he could do such a thing. That's why he gained the wisdom after all his brothers did to him, to be wise enough to see in the end that he needed to really forgive them for what they did, because there was God's plan in place. He thoroughly believed that with his heart. They had to do what they had to do so he could save all these people with food.
So I think that is a theology that many people find comforting when something bad happens to them, to submit that this is out of my control, and perhaps it was even part of a divine plan all along. Other people find that theology problematic. Did God want me to suffer? I mean, in Joseph's case, it worked out, minus all the suffering. But I think some people convincingly, they don't have to convince me, they just have to convince themselves, argue that when bad things happen, then they wouldn't want it to think that that was part of God's plan, that actually people just have the ability to negatively impact other people's lives. I don't think we're gonna resolve that question today. But I think you bring up a really important point about how Joseph viewed the situation, which he said this was all part of God's plan. Any final thoughts?
I just want to say one thing.
Please.
Rabbi Katie, she told me, keep doing, and whatever's on the inside will ultimately change. So I just wanted that. She and I went toe to toe on that one. Yeah, the insides and the outsides.
So I'm going to end with that idea. Mary Milana, thank you for a beautiful idea for the High Holy Days. That not necessarily directly related to forgiveness, but definitely related to teshuva and to returning to the Jewish soul inside of each one of us. There's an idea, we get it first in Exodus, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and only after we do might we understand. Well, it literally means here, but often understood as we'll do first and then we'll understand later. We'll do the commandments first. I don't know why the heck God doesn't want me to eat shrimp, but if I don't eat shrimp, or I keep all the laws of kashrut, someday I'll find meaning in it. So what I want to invite everybody to do is this year, and that was probably a bad example, maybe a good example would be, I don't know why I ever step foot in synagogue. I don't believe God is listening. I don't believe, I'm just, this is hypothetical, this is me speaking on my personal belief, but I don't believe there's any higher power out there, and my prayer is meaningless. But somebody brings you to services on Friday night, and slowly but surely, you start coming back, and you realize, there's something really powerful about being in this space together. And whatever that new experiment is that you might want to try in 5785, maybe you'll do first, and who you are on the inside can change. And that's my challenge, and that's my hope for each one of us in this year ahead, is that we'll experiment with something new and find out a little bit of who we were all along that we didn't know was there. So thank you all for being here. Shana Tova U'Metuka. Happy, sweet, and healthy New Year. Take care.
Yashakar.
Wonderful
Yeah.
class, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Yashikoha.
Ruth, yeah. Thanks for joining. And come back next week for Rabbi Ross on forgiving ourselves.